A 70-year-old mother wandered through the snow after her daughter-in-law quietly took everything she had left. Without shouting or cruelty, she used fake concern to make the old woman leave her son's home on her own. On that white, frozen road, a Navy SEAL and his German Shepherd suddenly stopped because of one urgent bark. The old woman said her son died in an accident.
All this snow,
but deep in her
feels
heart,
so final.
she never believed it.
Do you think we did
Then a phone hidden in an old coat, an oil-stained key, and disturbed evidence began to expose the plot. The deeper they searched, the clearer the truth became. Someone had turned family love into a trap to steal everything. Where are you watching from? Please like, subscribe, and help us reach 1,000 followers so we can keep telling meaningful stories. Now, let's begin. Winter did not arrive in Solace Ridge with a roar. It came quietly at first, like an old god stepping barefoot across the mountains, laying one pale finger over the roofs, the roads, the frozen orchard rows, and the dark arms of the pines. By late afternoon, the first day of winter break had turned the northern valley into a place half erased. Children had been released from school before noon. Storefronts glowed early. Families hurried home with paper bags of groceries, boxes of ornaments, and that particular kind of hope people carried when they believed a holiday could hold back loneliness. Ethan Vale drove through it without that belief. He was 35 years old, tall at about 6 feet, broad enough through the shoulders to suggest strength, but not vanity. His body had the lean, restrained build of a man trained for endurance rather than display, all compact muscle and disciplined stillness. His face was clean-shaven, the jaw square, the cheekbones sharp beneath skin made fair by birth and weathered by years of northern wind. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, slightly longer than regulation, as though even his rebellion knew where to stop. His eyes were gray-blue, steady and watchful, the kind of eyes that did not judge quickly because they had already seen what judgment cost. He wore the same old military gray tactical combat shirt he wore most days, its fabric softened by years of use, the cuffs and shoulders lightly frayed, the color faded by washing and weather. Beneath it showed the collar of a dark red thermal shirt, just bright enough to look like a coal under ash. His combat pants were a worn earth brown and moss green blend, scuffed at the knees, cargo pockets sagging slightly from use. Old military work boots rested heavy on the pedals, and a scratched military watch sat on his wrist. Beside him, in the passenger seat of the old truck, Rook lifted his head. Rook was a 6-year-old German Shepherd, cream gray with darker sable shading along his back and shoulders, his coat thick from winter, and his amber eyes too intelligent to pass for mere obedience. He wore a black working harness, trimmed with a deep red edge that caught the dim light whenever he moved. Rook was not the kind of dog that wasted sound. He watched first. He measured. He waited. Then, only when the world gave him something worth answering, he acted. That was why Ethan noticed when the dog's body changed. A moment before, Rook had been lying still, muzzle angled toward the windshield, ears relaxed but awake. Then his ears came forward. His shoulders tightened. The low, almost invisible thread of calm that usually ran through him snapped taut. Ethan slowed without thinking. "What?" he murmured. Snow slapped the windshield in soft bursts. The wipers dragged it aside in tired arcs, revealing only a tunnel of white road and the dark suggestion of trees beyond the ditches. The truck's heater clicked and rattled, fighting the cold with the dignity of an old soldier using a dull knife. Rook stood suddenly, paws braced, nose near the glass. Then he barked. It was not a warning bark at a deer, not a sharp command at an approaching stranger. It was deeper than that, urgent and hard enough to strike Ethan in the chest. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. "Rook!" The dog barked again, louder. Ahead, the snow shifted. At first, Ethan thought it was a branch moving in the wind. Then the shape separated itself from the white. A figure on the shoulder of the road, small and bent against the storm, moving slowly as if each step had to be negotiated with the earth. A coat too thin for the weather clung darkly to her narrow frame. A scarf had slipped loose around her neck. Snow had gathered on her shoulders and the crown of her silver hair. An old woman. Alone. In a blizzard. Ethan's foot moved to the brake, but his mind did what it often did before mercy could take hold. It measured risk. Distance from town. Road conditions. Unknown person. Unknown story. People in distress were not always harmless. Sometimes they were traps. Sometimes they were wounds so deep that touching them made them bleed onto you. The truck rolled past her by 10 yards. Rook turned in the seat and stared at him. Not at the woman. At him. Ethan exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh, almost a curse. "Don't start." Rook did not blink. The old woman's figure faded in the rearview mirror, nearly swallowed by the curtain of snow. Ethan saw, for a heartbeat, not a stranger on a road, but something older. A person left behind where others had chosen speed over conscience. He had known that look before in other places, on roads without snow, under skies without mercy. He had spent years telling himself he did not owe the world his hands every time it broke. Rook barked once more. Ethan hit the brakes. The truck complained as he shifted into reverse, backing carefully through his own tracks until the woman came into view again. He pulled onto the shoulder, put the truck in park, and sat for half a second longer than necessary. The storm pressed at the windows. The woman had stopped walking. She did not wave. She did not rush toward him. She simply stood in the snow, one hand gripping the handle of a small old suitcase, the other tucked close against her chest. Ethan opened the door. The wind met him like a slap. He stepped down into the snow, boots sinking, and came around the front of the truck. Rook leapt out after him, landing sure-footed, harness dark against the white, his body angled slightly ahead of Ethan but not blocking him. The dog's attention stayed on the woman, not hostile, not soft. Assessing. "Ma'am," Ethan called, keeping his voice low enough not to frighten her and loud enough to cross the wind. "Are you all right?" The woman looked up. She was somewhere in her early 70s, small and spare, but not fragile in the easy way people used that word for the old. Her face was pale from cold, lined deeply around the mouth and eyes, the skin thin but not lifeless. Her silver hair had been pinned earlier with care, though the storm had loosened it into fine strands along her temples. Her eyes were a clear gray, bright with exhaustion and something more difficult than fear. "I suppose that depends," she answered. Her voice was thin from the cold, but steady. There was even a faint edge of humor in it, like a candle refusing to go out just because the room had darkened. Ethan glanced down at the suitcase, then back at her. "Where are you headed?" She turned her face slightly toward the road ahead. "A little house outside Mill Creek Road, past the orchard bend." Ethan knew the place she meant. Or rather, he knew the kind of place. Old properties pushed out beyond the comfortable edges of town, where mailboxes leaned and fences remembered better years. "That's miles from here." Yes, she said. A simple answer. No apology inside it. The wind pushed snow between them. Rook stepped closer to the woman, nose working once at the air near her coat. She looked down at him. Something shifted in her face then, not relief exactly. Recognition, perhaps. As if the dog had greeted a part of her that people kept missing. Beautiful animal, she said softly. He knows it, Ethan replied, before he could stop himself. For the first time, the woman's mouth lifted a fraction. The humor vanished quickly, but its brief appearance made her suffering harder to look at. I can drive you, Ethan said. You shouldn't be walking in this. She hesitated. That hesitation told him more than agreement would have. People who had nowhere else to go often feared help, because help came with doors, questions, debts, and the possibility of being told no one last time. I don't want to trouble you. You already are, Ethan said. Her eyes moved to his face. He added, quieter, might as well let me do something useful about it. Rook gave a low huff, as if approving the negotiation. Ethan took the suitcase before she could protest. It weighed almost nothing. Somehow that made him angrier than if it had been heavy. He helped her into the truck, keeping one hand near her elbow but not gripping too tightly. She moved with careful dignity, as though pain and pride had reached an agreement long ago. Rook waited until she was settled, then jumped into the back seat rather than returning to his usual place. He positioned himself behind her, close enough to watch, far enough not to crowd. Ethan turned the heat higher. For the first mile, no one spoke. The road narrowed as they left the last porch lights of town behind. Snow erased the tire tracks almost as quickly as the truck made them. Pines leaned over the ditches like silent witnesses. The sky had lowered to the color of tin. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel. He wanted to ask why she had been walking alone. He wanted to ask who had let her step into weather that could kill a younger person in the wrong hour. But the question stayed in his throat. He had learned that grief, when cornered, could bite. He had also learned that asking was sometimes a way of making another person perform their pain for your understanding. So he drove. The woman sat with her gloved hands folded over the strap of her purse. The heater began bringing color back to her fingers. Her breathing steadied. Once, she looked toward the back seat where Rook watched the road through the side window. My son would have liked him, she said. Ethan did not answer right away. There it was, the door opening by itself. He was about your age, she continued. A little younger, perhaps, but not much. Ethan kept his eyes ahead. Was? The woman's throat moved. He died 3 weeks ago. The truck seemed to grow quieter, though the heater still rattled and the tires still hissed over packed snow. I'm sorry, Ethan said. He hated the sentence the moment it left him. It was too small. Most necessary things were. The woman nodded once, as if accepting the effort rather than the adequacy. There was an accident, she said. That's what they called it. A sudden one. Ethan heard the shape of the words. Not denial, not certainty, but a place between them where doubt had begun to live. Rook lowered his head onto the seat, but did not close his eyes. A few minutes passed. Then Ethan asked, And now you're going home? The woman looked out at the snow-covered road. For a long moment, she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. It was not weaker. It was emptier. I don't have a home anymore. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. The road curved toward Mill Creek. The houses thinned until there were no houses at all, only black trees, white fields, and the occasional fence line appearing and vanishing like memory. He had thought the storm was the worst thing she was walking through. Now he understood the storm had merely been honest about itself. They reached the old house near the edge of the orchard bend just as dusk deepened. Ethan pulled into a narrow drive half buried under fresh snow. His headlights swept over a small wooden house crouched beneath the weather, its porch sagging slightly, its siding gray with age. Several boards along the outer wall had cracked or fallen away, leaving dark holes where wind pressed through. One window had been patched with plastic from the inside. The roof held snow unevenly, as if some beams beneath had grown tired of pretending. The woman looked at the house without shame, which made Ethan respect her more. "This is it," she said. He killed the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she opened her door before he could come around. Rook slipped out first and stood by the porch steps, nose lifted, reading the house in ways Ethan could not. The woman stepped carefully into the snow and took back her suitcase. "Thank you," she said. "I would invite you in, but the place is old." The last word was doing too much work. Ethan looked at the holes in the siding. "With those gaps, it'll be freezing inside by midnight. It has survived worse winters. People say that about houses when they mean themselves." She looked at him then, and for the first time he saw the full weight she had been carrying under her coat. Not only grief, not only cold, but humiliation. The quiet cruelty of needing help and not wanting anyone to see how much. "My place isn't far," Ethan said. "I have tools in the truck. I can patch the worst of it tonight." She shook her head faintly. "You've done enough." "No," he said. "I've driven enough." Rook came up onto the porch and stood near the door, glancing once toward Ethan, then toward the broken wall. It was absurd, Ethan thought, how often the dog made silence feel like instruction. The woman noticed, too. "What is his name?" "Rook." "Rook," she repeated, and the name sounded gentler in her mouth. "Like the chess piece? Like the one that moves straight through trouble?" This time the woman did smile. Small, weary, but real. "I'm Eleanor Hayes," she said. "Ethan Vale." She considered him for a moment, then opened the door. Inside, the house surprised him. It was cold, yes. The air smelled of old wood, dust, and winter. But it was clean. Not polished, not comfortable, but cared for. A narrow table stood near the window with a folded cloth over it. 2 cups sat upside down beside the sink. A small shelf held books arranged by size. There was poverty here, but not neglect. There was loneliness, but not surrender. Ethan set down his toolbox and began where the wind was worst. He worked without much talk, measuring gaps, cutting temporary boards, fastening them over the broken places with quick, practiced movements. Eleanor lit an old lamp and stood nearby with her coat still on, as though the house had not yet given her permission to settle. Rook stayed close to the doorway at first, then moved through the room slowly, nose low, not exploring like a guest, but inspecting like a guardian. Ethan was tightening the last screw into a board near the back wall when his eyes landed on a framed photograph above the little table. A man in his early 30s stood beside Eleanor, smiling with one arm around her shoulders. He had sandy brown hair, a strong, open face, and the unguarded warmth of someone who had not yet learned how much the world could take. Beside him stood a woman with dark hair and a polished smile, elegant even in a casual photo, her hand resting lightly against his chest. Ethan looked away before staring became intrusion. Eleanor noticed, anyway. "My son," she said. "Daniel." The name entered the room like a person. "He left everything behind after the accident," she continued. "The house, the accounts, the insurance money he had bought for the future." Her voice did not break. That made it worse. "And yet," she said, looking around the little room with its patched walls and careful poverty, "this was my old house before he took me in. I never thought, at the end of everything, I would have to return to it." Ethan lowered the drill. Snow tapped against the patched boards where the wind could no longer enter so easily. Rook stood beneath the photograph, amber eyes lifted, body still. Ethan did not know what to say. He only knew the room had changed. The holes in the walls had been easy. Wood, screws, pressure, alignment. There were kinds of damage a man could fix with his hands and leave before anyone asked what his heart had done with the rest. This was not one of them. Eleanor touched the edge of the table. "They all said it was an accident," she whispered. Outside, winter pressed its white face to the glass. Inside, Ethan Vale stood in a stranger's cold house with his dog watching a dead man's photograph, and felt the first quiet pull of a story that did not want to stay buried. He had stopped because Rook barked. Now he wondered if the dog had heard something long before either of them did. The wind did not stop after Ethan finished patching the worst holes. It only changed its voice. Before, it had whistled through the broken boards like something cruel and hungry, pushing cold fingers into the little house as if it had every right to be there. Now, with the temporary planks screwed over the gaps, the storm pressed against the walls and muttered outside instead. The sound was still there, still alive, but it no longer owned the room. Eleanor Hayes noticed the difference before Ethan did. She stood near the small kitchen table, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, her thin shoulders still wrapped in her old gray-blue winter coat. Snow had melted along the hem and left dark patches in the fabric. She had not taken the coat off, even though the little stove had begun to breathe faint heat into the room. It was not warmth yet. More like a promise someone might keep if given time. "That is better," she said. Her voice carried gratitude, but also a careful restraint, as if she feared accepting too much comfort might make it vanish. Ethan packed the drill back into his toolbox. His hands moved with the old efficiency that had followed him out of war and into every small repair since. Wood, metal, screws, pressure, those things made sense. A broken wall gave a man a simple bargain. Find the gap, cover it, fasten it down. People were less reasonable. He glanced at Eleanor again. She was older than she had looked in the truck, but not weaker. In the lamp glow, her face held the fine structure of a woman who had once carried herself with quiet authority. Her cheekbones were delicate beneath papery skin, her nose narrow, her mouth controlled even when tired. Silver hair, still pinned with stubborn dignity, had loosened in soft strands around her temples. Her eyes were gray and clear, but grief had set itself behind them like winter behind glass. Rook moved near the door, his cream-gray sable coat catching the lamplight in muted bands. The German shepherd had shaken the snow from his back outside, but a few damp flecks still clung to the darker fur along his shoulders. His black harness with deep red trim sat snug against his body, the handle rising between his shoulder blades. He had not relaxed completely. He never did in a new place. But his tail hung neutral, and his amber eyes moved slowly around the room, reading what no one had said. The house itself seemed to be trying to stand respectfully despite its condition. It was small, only a front room, kitchen corner, narrow hall, and 2 doors beyond. The floorboards were old but swept. A chipped white mug sat upside down beside the sink. A clean towel hung from a nail. On the shelf by the stove, jars of tea, salt, dried beans, and 2 carefully folded cloth napkins stood arranged with almost ceremonial order. Poverty had touched the house. Neglect had not. That mattered to Ethan more than he wanted it to. "Do you have enough firewood?" he asked. Eleanor looked toward a short stack near the stove. "For tonight." "And tomorrow?" She did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. "I can bring some by," he said. Her expression tightened. Not rejection exactly. Protection. "I don't want to become your winter project, Mr. Vale." "Ethan." "Ethan, then." She gave a small nod, granting the correction but not the argument. "Still, I do not want to become that." He looked at the patched wall. "Too late. I already screwed boards to your house. That's binding in some rural counties." A soft sound escaped her. It was almost a laugh, though worn thin by cold and loss. Rook's ears shifted at the sound, as if surprised the house could hold anything like it. Ethan closed the toolbox. "I'm not asking to take over, just saying the weather doesn't care about pride." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "It never has." For a moment, the room fell into the kind of silence that asks whether anyone is brave enough to fill it. Ethan was not. He had spent years learning how to stand inside silence without disturbing it. Silence had kept him alive. Silence had kept other people from asking too much. Silence had built a fence around parts of him that did not like daylight. But Eleanor seemed to understand silence differently. She did not fear it. She listened to it, as if waiting for it to admit something. She crossed slowly to the stove and opened its little iron door. The fire inside was weak but persistent, licking at the split wood with orange patience. Her hands, thin and pale, trembled faintly as she adjusted a piece with the poker. Rook walked after her. Not close enough to crowd. Close enough to guard. Eleanor noticed and glanced down. "Your dog has manners." "He has standards," Ethan said. "Higher than most people's, I imagine." "Usually." Another brief smile touched her mouth, then faded. She looked around the house, not as if seeing it for the first time, but as if measuring how far she had fallen without wanting to call it falling. Her eyes moved over the patched boards, the old table, the narrow cot visible through one half-open door, the framed photograph above the shelf. Daniel's photograph. Ethan had already seen it, and he deliberately did not look again. But he felt it in the room the way a person feels a clock ticking after someone mentions time. "This house belonged to my husband's family first," Eleanor said, "long before Daniel bought the place in town." Ethan remained standing beside the toolbox. Her voice had shifted into the tone people used when they did not know whether they were explaining something to a listener or to themselves. "It was never grand, but it was ours. My husband, Walter, used to say it was built stubborn rather than well." She touched the back of the chair with one finger. "He died 12 years ago. Daniel moved me into his home 2 winters later. He said this place was too far out, too cold, too much for me." She paused. "I argued, of course." "Did you win?" "I was married for 43 years and raised 1 son. I have won very few arguments cleanly." Ethan felt the corner of his mouth move despite himself. Eleanor saw it. Something in her gaze warmed, not with happiness, but with recognition. Humor, he thought, was sometimes the last small knife people kept when grief took everything else. "He wanted me safe," she continued. And perhaps he wanted me close. He never said the second part. Men are bad at saying the second part. Yes, she said. They often are. The words settled too near him. Ethan bent to pick up his toolbox, giving his hands something to do. Rook suddenly lifted his head. The movement was small. No bark, no growl, just attention sharpening like a blade under cloth. Ethan noticed at once. The dog had turned toward the narrow hallway, not the front door. His ears angled forward, his nose worked the air. "What is it?" Ethan asked softly. Rook took 2 slow steps. Eleanor looked from the dog to the hallway. "There's nothing back there except old boxes." Rook stopped near the dark corner beside a coat rack. An old work jacket hung there, brown canvas faded nearly gray, its sleeves stiff from age and cold. Beneath it sat a cardboard box with folded blankets and a pair of cracked rubber boots. The dog did not touch the jacket. He only stood before it, still as carved stone, eyes fixed, nostrils moving once. Eleanor's face changed, not dramatically, but Ethan saw the line of her mouth tighten. "That was Daniel's," she said. The room seemed to draw a breath around the name. Rook remained there for several seconds more, then looked back at Ethan. It was not a demand, not yet. It was only the kind of attention that made a man wonder what the world had placed in a corner and expected him not to see. Ethan felt the old alertness move through him. Not fear, not suspicion exactly. A tightening of the inner map. Then Rook turned away and returned to Eleanor's side, as if the moment had served its purpose. Eleanor watched him come back. "He used to hang it there when he visited," she said, "even after I moved out. He said the place needed one living thing that still looked like work." She pressed her lips together. "I haven't touched it." Ethan did not ask why. There are relics in every house. Some people keep wedding rings in drawers, old coffee cans full of nails, birthday cards tied with string. Some keep coats on hooks because taking them down feels too much like agreeing that the body will never return to fill them. The old dog had not found evidence. He had found a wound with fabric over it, and Ethan, standing in the patched little house with snow clawing at the windows, felt the story deepen by 1 silent inch. Eleanor turned back toward the table. "My daughter-in-law said it would be better if I stayed away from Daniel's house for a while," she said. Ethan kept his face still. She didn't say it cruelly. That may be the worst of it. Eleanor lowered herself slowly into the chair. Cruelty would have given me something solid to stand against. She was gentle, concerned, very reasonable. Ethan disliked the word before she finished saying it. Reasonable people could do terrible damage. He had learned that long ago. Men with clean boots and calm voices had ordered things that screaming men would never have dared. "What did she say?" he asked. Eleanor folded her hands together on the table. That I needed rest. That the house was full of strain. That seeing Daniel's things every day might keep me from healing. She said the insurance paperwork and estate matters were complicated, and I should not have to carry them. She offered to carry them for you. Yes. There was no bitterness in Eleanor's answer, only a tired astonishment, as if she still could not believe how easily care and control could wear the same coat. She said it would only be temporary, that I could come back once things were settled. Eleanor looked toward the patched wall. But then she changed the locks. For practical reasons, she said. Contractors, insurance people, safety. Ethan set the toolbox down again. The gesture was quieter than anger, but not by much. She changed the locks while you were gone? After suggesting I rest here a few days. Eleanor's voice remained even. She sent 2 bags with one of Daniel's old friends from town, very neatly packed. Medication, night clothes, winter stockings, my Bible. Nothing one could call neglectful. That made it worse. A villain who forgets medicine can be condemned quickly. A villain who remembers it becomes harder for the world to accuse. Ethan looked toward the window. Outside, the night had thickened. Snow moved through the dim porch light like ash from a white fire. "What's her name?" "Lydia." The name had shape, smooth edges, cold center. Eleanor touched the rim of the photograph frame with her eyes, but not her hands. Lydia Hayes is a beautiful woman, very composed. Dark hair, always neat, tall, elegant. She knew which flowers to choose for the service before I remembered there would be flowers. She wrote thank you notes before I could make myself read the sympathy cards. Ethan heard it then. Not accusation. A mother's bewilderment. "She didn't seem broken," Eleanor said. "People grieve differently." "Yes." Eleanor nodded. "That is what I told myself." Rook lay down beside her chair, but not fully. His front paws stretched forward, head lifted, ears open. The position made Ethan think of soldiers sleeping with boots on. Eleanor looked down at him. He doesn't believe that. Rook has opinions about nearly everything. Does he? Mostly about people. And what does he think of me? Ethan studied the dog for a moment. He thinks you're tired. That is not much of an opinion. For him, it is almost affection. This time, Eleanor's smile lasted longer. Then she looked around the little house again, and the smile retreated. "I should not have left," she said. Ethan said nothing. "I knew it when I stepped out of Daniel's doorway. I knew it when Lydia put my suitcase by the hall table and touched my arm, as if I were the one being difficult." Eleanor's fingers tightened. But there are moments when you become so tired of being made to feel unreasonable that leaving seems like the only polite thing left to do. Ethan understood that too well. Not from daughter-in-law diplomacy or estate papers. From other rooms, other chains of command, other polished voices explaining why pain should be managed quietly for everyone's convenience. He had spent years letting silence make him easier to carry. "I am not sure she forced me out," Eleanor said. "No," Ethan replied. "She made staying feel like trespassing." Eleanor looked at him sharply. For the first time since he had met her, something in her eyes opened fully. "Yes," she whispered. "That is exactly it." The wind struck the side of the house, but the patched boards held. The small victory felt unreasonably large. Ethan checked the stove, then the back door, then the window latch that did not sit square. He made a mental list without meaning to. More wood, weather stripping, maybe a proper patch on the west wall if the old studs were still good, a better lock. The list formed the way old habits formed, without permission. "I'll bring wood in the morning," he said. Eleanor began to object. He raised one hand. "Not a project, weather." She looked at him for a long moment, measuring the difference between help and possession. Finally, she nodded. "Weather, then." Ethan lifted the toolbox. "Do you have a phone?" "Yes. Old landline. It works when the weather is in a generous mood." "Do you have my number?" "No." He took a scrap of paper from the table and wrote it down. His handwriting was angular, plain, not made for beauty. He slid it toward her. "My place is 15 minutes from here if the road is clear. Longer if the mountain is feeling dramatic." "The mountain often is." "Then call before it starts performing." She folded the paper once and placed it beside the lamp, not in a drawer. That small decision told him she might use it. Rook rose when Ethan moved toward the door, but paused beside Eleanor before following. The dog lowered his head briefly, not quite touching her hand. Eleanor's fingers hovered above his fur. Then she let them rest between his ears. Rook accepted the touch with solemn patience. "Thank you," she said, and Ethan knew she was not speaking only to him. Outside, the storm had softened. Snow still fell, but the road glowed faintly beneath it, a pale vein through the dark. Ethan stepped onto the porch and looked back once. Through the open door, Eleanor stood in the lamplight of a house too old for her grief and too honest for the lies that had followed her there. Behind her, the patched boards held against the wind. At her side, Rook waited, half in the house, half out, as if reluctant to leave her entirely. Ethan felt, with quiet irritation, that some part of him understood the dog. He had not come looking for this. He had only stopped because of a bark in the snow. But as he drove home later, with Rook finally lying silent beside him, Ethan could not shake the image of Daniel's work jacket hanging in the hallway, untouched, waiting in the dark like a sentence no one had finished. And worse than that, he could not shake Eleanor's words. Not forced out. Made to leave. There were cruelties that broke doors, and there were cruelties that opened them politely, then waited for you to step through. Morning came late to Mill Creek Road. The storm had spent the night writing itself over everything, smoothing the fields into white silence, bending the grass beneath frost, softening the tire tracks until the road looked untouched by human intention. When Ethan Vale turned his old truck toward Eleanor Hayes's house, the sky above the northern valley had cleared just enough to reveal a pale winter sun, thin as a coin held under ice. Rook sat upright in the passenger seat. The German Shepherd had been quiet all morning, which meant more than noise would have. His cream-gray sable coat looked darker against the truck's worn interior. His black harness trimmed with deep red pulled snug across his chest. His amber eyes tracked the roadside, not anxious, not distracted, simply alert. Ethan had learned years ago that Rook's silence came in different kinds. There was the relaxed silence of a dog half asleep by the stove. There was the patient silence before a command. And then there was this one, the listening kind. Ethan drove with a bundle of split firewood strapped in the truck bed and a box of basic supplies on the floor. Weather stripping, nails, batteries, 2 canned soups, coffee, and a small bag of dog biscuits he had not meant to buy, but had bought anyway. He told himself it was because old houses needed things. Weather demanded preparation. Winter punished pride. That explanation worked until he reached Eleanor's driveway and saw her standing on the porch before he could knock. She wore the same long gray-blue coat from the night before, though now it had been brushed clean of snow. A wool scarf, faded brown and carefully knotted, circled her neck. In daylight she looked smaller, but also more deliberate. Her silver hair had been pinned into a low knot, neat despite the cold. The lines on her face were deepened by exhaustion, yet her eyes were steady, not hopeful. Hope would have been too easy. She looked like a woman who had survived the night and resented how much strength that had cost. "You came back," she said. Ethan lifted one end of the firewood bundle. "Weather." Her mouth moved slightly. "Yes, weather." Rook jumped down from the truck and climbed the porch steps first. He paused beside Eleanor and looked up at her, not wagging, not demanding, just acknowledging. She lowered a hand to his head. "Good morning, Rook." The dog accepted the touch, then immediately turned toward the door. Ethan noticed. So did Eleanor. Inside, The house still held the cold, but not as bitterly as before. The boards Ethan had fastened over the broken wall had held through the night. Snow had pushed against them from outside, leaving faint lines of frost around the edges, but no wind came through. The little stove glowed low. A kettle sat on top, whispering. "You kept the fire going," Ethan said. "I have lived longer than most fools," Eleanor replied. "I know how not to freeze when given enough wood." There was humor in the words, but not enough to hide the strain beneath them. Ethan stacked the new firewood near the stove, then began checking the patches and window seams. He worked quietly, because the house seemed to prefer quiet. Every sound had a place there. The scrape of wood on wood, the kettle's breath, the distant creak of old boards settling under snow. Eleanor moved with small, careful efficiency, setting coffee on the table, folding a blanket that did not need folding, touching the back of a chair as she passed, as though confirming the furniture had stayed with her overnight. Rook did not settle. He moved to the narrow hallway. Ethan watched from the corner of his eye, but said nothing. The dog stood near the coat rack again. Not beneath the old brown work jacket exactly, but close enough for the air to change around it. The jacket hung in the same place as before, faded canvas stiff at the sleeves, the shoulders shaped by a body no longer there. Daniel Hayes had left it behind, and Eleanor had left it untouched, and now the house seemed to have built a silence around that fact. Ethan tightened a strip of weather seal along the window frame. Rook's ears twitched. A sound came from the hallway. Not the wind. Not wood. A faint, muffled vibration. Ethan stopped moving. For a second the sound vanished. Then it came again. A thin, buried buzz, almost swallowed by the house. Eleanor turned from the stove. "What was that?" Ethan did not answer. Rook stood perfectly still, head lowered, ears forward, eyes fixed on the jacket. The sound came a third time. The house, which had held grief all night like an old church holding candle smoke, suddenly seemed to speak from inside the dead man's coat. Not with a voice, with a pulse. A tiny mechanical heartbeat from a pocket no one had touched. A signal trapped between yesterday and whatever truth had failed to arrive. Eleanor's face drained of what little color the morning had returned. "Daniel's phone," she whispered. Ethan looked at her. "I thought—" Her voice faltered. "Lydia said everything had been collected. His things from the truck, his wallet, his phone. She said the officers had what they needed." The vibration stopped. The silence afterward was worse. Ethan moved slowly toward the coat. "May I?" Eleanor nodded once, though the motion seemed to hurt. He lifted the jacket carefully from the hook. It was heavier than it looked. The canvas smelled faintly of cold dust, machine oil, and something warmer beneath it, human, familiar, nearly gone. Rook stepped closer but did not interfere. Ethan checked the outer pockets first. Empty. Then the inner lining. His fingers found a hard shape wedged deep into a torn seam behind the breast pocket. He eased it free. An old black phone, scratched along the edges, screen cracked at one corner. Its battery icon blinked red when he pressed the side button. Almost dead. But not yet. Eleanor covered her mouth with one hand. Ethan glanced at the screen. Missed calls. Recent. One name repeated again and again. Clara Whitmore. Below it, a voicemail notification. Eleanor lowered herself into the nearest chair without looking away from the phone. "Clara? You know her?" She was Daniel's friend, a lawyer. Eleanor swallowed. They grew up 2 streets apart. She used to come over with scraped knees and more opinions than teeth. Ethan tapped the voicemail icon. A woman's voice emerged, strained but controlled, slightly distorted by the failing speaker. Daniel, it's Clara. I've tried 3 times. Today is the last day I can hold the documents without your confirmation. If you changed your mind, tell me. If you didn't, I need you here before 5. I can't keep this open without exposing myself professionally. Please call me. The message ended. No explanation. No accusation. Only urgency. Ethan replayed it once. Eleanor did not stop him. The second time, he listened for what was beneath the words. Fear concealed under procedure, loyalty restrained by law, and something else. Frustration, perhaps, or regret arriving too early. What documents? Eleanor asked. Ethan looked at the phone in his hand. I think we need to ask Clara. The law office sat above a bakery on the quiet end of Main Street, where old brick buildings leaned shoulder to shoulder against the cold. Solace Ridge had dressed itself for winter break with evergreen wreaths in windows, paper snowflakes taped by school children, and strings of lights that looked cheerful until the wind shook them. The town seemed to be pretending life was simple because holidays required the effort. Clara Whitmore's office door had her name printed in black letters on frosted glass. Clara Whitmore, attorney at law. Below it, smaller, estate planning, family law, civil mediation. Ethan noticed the order. Estates first, families second. Mediation last, like hope after damage. Clara opened the door herself. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with dark brown hair pulled back into a low knot so tight it made the sharp lines of her face more severe. Her skin was light with a tired olive undertone, the kind people got from too many hours under office lights and not enough sleep. She wore a charcoal suit, white blouse, no jewelry except a small silver watch. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and guarded. She looked like someone who believed in rules because people had disappointed her too often to trust instinct alone. Her gaze moved from Ethan to Eleanor, then to Rook standing at Ethan's left side. The dog's presence clearly unsettled her, though she hid it well. Mrs. Hayes, Clara said softly. Eleanor's shoulders stiffened at the formality. Clara. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Clara stepped back. Come in. Her office was neat, almost painfully so. Files stacked square, pens aligned, a framed diploma on the wall. A photograph of a younger Clara, with a boyish-looking Daniel at some county fair, rested on a side shelf, half turned away, as though she had not decided whether to display memory or hide it. Ethan saw Eleanor notice it. Clara did too. She closed the door. I'm sorry, Clara said. I should have called you. Yes, Eleanor replied. You should have. There was no anger in the words, which made them land harder. Clara folded her hands at her waist. I didn't know what was appropriate. Ethan set Daniel's phone on the desk. Clara's face changed. Only a little. But enough. Where did you get that? In his coat, Ethan said. At Eleanor's house. That phone was missing. Seems so. Clara sat down slowly behind her desk, not because she was calm, but because her knees seemed to require structure. She looked at the phone like it had returned from a place things were not supposed to return. Ethan remained standing. Rook sat beside him, eyes fixed on Clara. Not accusing, simply present. What documents were you holding? Ethan asked. Clara's gaze lifted to him. And you are? Ethan Vale. That doesn't answer why you're involved. No, he said. It answers who's asking. For the first time, Clara's controlled expression cracked into something like irritation. Good, Ethan thought. Irritation was more honest than polished grief. Eleanor leaned forward. Clara? Please. The lawyer closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she looked older. Daniel came to me 2 weeks before the accident, she said. He believed Lydia was having an affair. Eleanor went completely still. Ethan did not look at her. Some blows deserved privacy even when delivered in the same room. He had gathered some records, Clara continued. Messages, credit card charges, a hotel receipt. Nothing dramatic by courtroom standards, but enough to show pattern. He wanted advice. About divorce? Ethan asked. Yes, but not only that. Clara touched the edge of a folder on her desk, but did not open it yet. He wanted to change several documents. Beneficiary designations, property authority, emergency contact forms. He wanted his mother protected before Lydia knew he was filing. Eleanor's eyes shone, but no tears fell. My Daniel asked for that? Yes. The answer seemed to wound and comfort her at once. Clara drew a breath. He was supposed to come in the day he died. He never arrived. Why didn't you say anything? Ethan asked. Clara's jaw tightened. Because Lydia came to see me first. The room seemed to lean toward her. She told me Daniel was unstable, Clara said. That grief over some private issue, work stress, marital trouble, she framed it carefully. She said he had become paranoid and was trying to move assets to punish her before they could seek counseling. She never asked me to violate privilege. She was too smart for that. She just made sure that when Daniel spoke to me, I heard him through doubt. Ethan felt something cold settle behind his ribs. A clever person did not need to destroy evidence. They only needed to make the witness mistrust it. Clara's voice dropped. When he missed the appointment, I thought maybe he had realized the plan was reckless, or that Lydia had been right about him being impulsive. Then he died, and everything became complicated. Convenient, Ethan said. Clara looked at him sharply. He did not apologize. Eleanor stared at the desk. He tried to help me. Yes, Clara said. Her face tightened with shame. And I let someone convince me he might be using you. For several seconds, only the office clock moved. Then Rook stood. He crossed the rug slowly and stopped beside Eleanor's chair. The dog rested his muzzle lightly against her knee, not asking, not comforting in any human way, just anchoring her. Eleanor's hand settled onto his head. Clara watched the gesture, and whatever defense remained in her eyes weakened. I still have the drafts, she said. Ethan looked at her. Not signed, not filed, but dated, time-stamped in my system. She opened the folder at last. If someone wants to understand what Daniel intended before he died, this is where it starts. Eleanor did not reach for the papers immediately. Her fingers hovered above them as if they were not documents, but something alive and fragile. What did Lydia get after he died? Ethan asked. Clara looked at him. Too much, she said. Outside the office window, holiday lights blinked red and gold against the white afternoon, absurdly cheerful. Somewhere downstairs, the bakery bell chimed as a customer entered, carrying ordinary hunger into an ordinary day. But in that office above Main Street, a dead man's last unfinished choice had found its way back into the hands of the living. Ethan looked at Daniel's cracked phone on the desk. It had not held a confession. It had held a missed chance. And sometimes, he thought, a missed chance was the loudest evidence of all. Clara Whitmore did not let them leave her office with the original documents. That Ethan respected. She copied everything first, hands moving with the controlled precision of a woman trying to repair a mistake without confessing too much of herself in the motion. The printer hummed in the corner of the office, spitting out pages that smelled faintly of warm toner and old worry. Outside the frosted glass, Solace Ridge went on pretending winter break was about lights, bakery windows, and children set loose from school. Inside, the past was learning how to speak in legal margins. Eleanor Hayes sat very still in the chair beside Ethan. Her thin hands rested over her purse, fingers woven together so tightly that the knuckles had gone pale. She had not cried when Clara said Daniel had wanted to protect her. Somehow that had made the room feel more fragile. Tears would have given grief a shape. Eleanor's silence made it drift everywhere. Rook lay near her feet, front paws stretched forward, amber eyes half-lidded but awake. His cream-gray coat made a soft shadow against the dark office rug. He had stopped watching Clara with suspicion, but he had not dismissed her either. Rook never forgave quickly. He did not hate. He filed things away. Clara slid the copied documents into a clean folder. "These are drafts," she said, as if the word had weight. "They prove intent, not completion." Ethan took the folder. Intent matters. In court, intent matters less than people think. Clara's mouth tightened. But in an investigation, it can change where someone looks. Eleanor raised her eyes. "Then where do we look?" Clara hesitated. For all her sharpness, she looked suddenly younger. Not innocent, exactly, but stripped of the armor her profession had trained onto her. Her dark hair, pulled into that severe knot, made the tiredness under her eyes easier to see. She had the face of a woman who had spent years trusting rules, only to discover how gracefully a liar could walk through them. "Daniel told me his truck had been acting strange," Clara said. "Not in detail. He mentioned brakes, said he was taking it to Noah Baines before he came here." Ethan looked up. "Who's Noah?" "Mechanic," Clara said. "Runs Baines Auto and Tire near the south edge of town. Daniel trusted him." Eleanor's fingers loosened slightly. "Noah fixed Daniel's first truck," she said. "The awful blue one that made that coughing noise whenever it rained." Clara's expression softened despite herself. "He said it sounded like a dying goose." "It did," Eleanor said. For a brief second, Daniel was not a dead man in a folder. He was a young man with a broken truck and a laugh still alive in other people's memories. Then the moment passed, and winter returned. Ethan slipped the documents under his arm. "We'll go there." Clara stood. "I should come?" Ethan studied her. She did not flinch. "I owe him that much," she said quietly. Eleanor looked at Clara for a long moment. There were many things in that look. Disappointment, grief, memory, and the old tenderness of someone who had once let a dark-haired girl with scraped knees eat cookies at her kitchen table. Finally, Eleanor said, "Then come." Baines Auto and Tire sat past the cheerful part of town, where Main Street gave up its holiday decorations and became practical again. The building was long, low, and metal-sided, with faded blue trim and a sign that had survived too many winters to care about looking new. Tire tracks crossed the packed snow in front of two open service bays. The smell of diesel, rubber, old coffee, and cold iron met them before Ethan shut off the truck. Inside one bay, a man stood bent over the engine of a county plow. Noah Baines was in his mid-50s, broad through the shoulders and thicker through the middle, built like someone who had spent decades lifting things badly because they needed lifting. His face was weathered and round, but not soft, with a gray-brown mustache that sat above a mouth clearly uninterested in flattery. His hair had thinned on top and grown stubborn around the sides. He wore a red and black flannel shirt beneath a grease-darkened canvas vest, old jeans, and work boots with salt-dried white along the seams. His hands were large, cracked, and permanently stained at the nails. He looked up when they entered, and irritation crossed his face first. Then he saw Eleanor. The irritation left. Not in a dramatic way. Noah did not seem made for dramatic shifts, but his eyes changed, and his shoulders settled into something almost respectful. "Mrs. Hayes," he said. "Noah." He wiped his hands on a rag already too dirty to help. His gaze moved to Clara, then Ethan, then Rook. The dog stood at Ethan's side, quiet and steady, watching the mechanic with the solemn interest of a judge who smelled motor oil. Noah pointed the rag toward Rook. "That dog bite?" "Only fools," Ethan said. Noah grunted. "Then I'll try to speak carefully." Eleanor did not smile, but something in her face acknowledged the effort. Ethan stepped forward. "We're asking about Daniel's truck." The garage changed around the sentence, not physically. The tools still hung on the wall. The plow still sat with its hood open. Somewhere in the office, an old radio muttered weather reports through static. But the air tightened. Noah's hand stopped moving against the rag. "What about it? When did he bring it in?" Noah's eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "Ethan Vale." "That's supposed to mean something?" "No." "Good. I hate guessing." Clara opened her folder. "Noah, Daniel was scheduled to come to my office the day he died. He said he was bringing his truck to you first." Noah looked at her, then at Eleanor. The old woman's face did not beg him. It simply waited. That seemed to matter. Noah tossed the rag onto a metal bench. "He brought it in the morning before the wreck. Said the brakes felt wrong." "What kind of wrong?" Ethan asked. Noah gave him a sharper look, the kind one tradesman gives another when trying to determine whether a question comes from curiosity or competence. "Soft at first," he said, "then grabbing, like pressure wasn't building clean. Could be air in the line, could be master cylinder starting to fail, could be something worse if the cold got into it." "Was it safe to drive?" "No." The answer came immediately. "Not with snow coming." Eleanor closed her eyes. Noah saw it and looked away, giving her the mercy of not watching. "I told him I needed time to check it properly," Noah continued. "He said he had an appointment late afternoon, but he'd wait if he had to. He drank coffee in the office for a while, made 2 calls, paced like a man trying not to look like he was pacing." Clara looked down. Ethan heard the unspoken connection. Daniel had been trying to reach her. "Then what happened?" Ethan asked. Noah's jaw shifted. "His wife came." The name did not have to be said, but Eleanor whispered it anyway. "Lydia." Noah nodded once. She was polished as church silver. Long beige coat, dark hair, expensive boots that had no business in my slush. Smiled like she'd practiced in the mirror and hated herself for needing to. That description fit the woman Ethan had not yet met too well. What did she say? That Daniel needed the truck back. Said he had calmed down and changed his plans. Noah's mouth twisted. Her words, not mine. Clara's face tightened. Ethan noticed. Noah kept going. "I told her it wasn't repaired. She said she understood. Said she'd take it home and Daniel would call me later." "Did Daniel authorize that?" "No." The word fell like a hammer. Ethan let the silence sit. Rook moved then. Not toward Noah. Toward a dark corner near the office door where a row of old customer keys hung on labeled hooks. The German shepherd did not touch them. He simply lifted his nose, breathed once, then turned his head toward the bay where Daniel's truck must have once sat. Ethan followed the movement with his eyes. Something small shifted inside him. Dogs lived in the world of sequence, scents layered over one another. Arrival, contact, movement, departure. To humans, the garage was a room. To Rook, it was a history written in oil, rubber, metal, skin, and lies. Noah noticed the dog's attention. Smart animal. Smarter than most conversations, Ethan said. Noah snorted. That's not hard. Ethan returned to the point. You have paperwork? Noah gave him a look that suggested paperwork offended him personally. Then he walked into the small office attached to the bay. The office was cramped, overheated, and cluttered with old invoices, parts catalogs, a coffee maker stained brown around the base, and a wall calendar showing last month because no one had cared enough to change it. Noah pulled open a metal filing drawer and rifled through folders with thick fingers. Eleanor stood just inside the doorway, not touching anything. Clara remained beside her, folder held to her chest like a shield. Rook sat at the threshold. Ethan stayed standing. Noah found the invoice and slapped it onto the desk. Brake inspection, he said. Not completed. Ethan read the notation. Vehicle not released as road safe. Customer spouse removed vehicle before inspection completion. There was a signature line. Lydia Hayes. Eleanor made a small sound. Not quite pain, not quite breath. Clara stepped closer. She signed this? She signed with a lot of confidence for someone ignoring a mechanic, Noah said. Ethan looked at the timestamp, 11:42 a.m. Daniel had been due at Clara's office before 5. The day narrowed. Snow outside, a truck with faulty brakes, a wife who had already poisoned the lawyer's trust. A mother gently moved out of the way, a man trying to change documents before time closed around him, and then the truck was taken from the garage. The rehook arrived not as a shout, but as a line of ink on carbon paper. Ethan stared at Lydia's signature, and for one suspended second the whole story seemed to tilt. The accident was no longer a storm, no longer bad luck, no longer a mountain road choosing its victim at random. It had a hand near it now. Not pushing, not striking, just opening the wrong door at exactly the right time. Noah reached past him and tapped the lower half of the invoice. There's more. Ethan looked down. A note written in Noah's blunt hand. Advised not safe for winter driving. Spouse stated, I'll take responsibility. Clara covered her mouth. Eleanor did not move. The old woman's face had gone very calm, and that calm frightened Ethan more than tears would have. Did she? Eleanor asked softly. Noah looked at her. Yes, ma'am. The words seemed too large for the little office. Ethan's mind began assembling what the heart did not want to touch. The invoice proved Lydia knew. It proved warning. It proved responsibility acknowledged. But it did not prove Daniel had been deceived into driving. Not yet. Did Daniel know she picked it up? Ethan asked. Noah shook his head. He wasn't here. He walked over to Maggie's diner to make calls and get food. Lydia came while he was gone. Did you call him? I tried. Went straight to voicemail. Noah frowned. Which was odd. He'd been checking the thing every 2 minutes earlier. Daniel's missing phone sat like a ghost in Ethan's memory, hidden in a coat instead of in a dead man's pocket. Clara looked at Ethan, and he knew she had thought the same thing. Noah turned to his old desktop computer. There's a camera facing the lot. Mostly catches raccoons and bad parking, but it would show her taking the truck. He clicked through files with the irritation of a man who considered technology a personal insult. Grainy footage filled the screen. The timestamp matched. A dark pickup rolled backward out of the service bay. Lydia appeared beside the driver's door for a moment. Tall, composed, beige coat, stark against the oily gray of the garage lot. She moved with no hurry, no fear. She spoke to Noah, signed the clipboard, then climbed into the truck. The truck left. Eleanor's hand gripped the doorframe. Rook stood, taking one step closer to her. Ethan watched Lydia's image disappear from the frame. A woman could lie with words. The footage showed something worse. Comfort. She had not looked like a woman helping a stressed husband. She had looked like a woman completing a task. "Can we get a copy?" Clara asked. Noah gave her a grim look. "Already making one." The radio in the bay crackled suddenly. Weather advisory, snow accumulation, hazardous driving conditions in shaded mountain corridors. Noah reached over and snapped it off. No one thanked him. Back outside, the winter light had shifted toward afternoon. The snow in the lot glared white under the thin sun. Ethan loaded the copied invoice and the video drive into his truck's glove compartment. Clara stood near Eleanor, speaking quietly, but Eleanor seemed beyond hearing for a moment. Noah came out last, hands shoved into his vest pockets. "Daniel wasn't drunk," he said suddenly. Ethan turned. Noah stared toward the road, jaw working. "If anyone told you that, they're lying or repeating someone who was." He was upset, sure, tired, angry maybe, but not drunk. He had 2 coffees here and half a plate of eggs at Maggie's. I watched him count cash for the tip twice because his hands were shaking. That's not whiskey. That's a man with too much in his head. Eleanor's eyes filled then. Only then. "Thank you," she said. Noah looked uncomfortable with gratitude. "Don't thank me for being late." "You weren't late," Clara said quietly. Noah turned that hard mechanic's gaze on her. "Everybody was late." No one argued. As Ethan helped Eleanor into the truck, Rook paused beside the passenger door and looked back at the garage. His ears were forward, his body still. Ethan followed his gaze. Noah stood in the bay opening, broad and grim, watching them leave. Behind him, tools hung in neat rows. A lift stood empty. The garage was only a garage, full of ordinary machines and ordinary failures. Yet somewhere between those tools and that unsigned safety, a man's last day had bent toward death. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat. Clara followed in her own car. For several minutes, no one inside the truck spoke. Then Eleanor said, "She knew." Ethan looked at the road ahead. "Yes." "She knew the truck was dangerous." "Yes." "And Daniel did not." Ethan did not answer as quickly this time, because truth, if spoken too soon, could become cruelty. Finally, he said, "We know what Noah told her. We know she took it. We know Daniel was trying to reach Clara. We know his phone wasn't with him." Eleanor turned toward him. "What don't we know?" Ethan thought of the missing hours, the road, the snow, Daniel's trust in the wrong voice. He thought of Lydia's signature beneath the words, "I'll take responsibility." "We don't know what she told him after." The old woman looked out at the white fields. She would have told him exactly what he needed to hear. Ethan said nothing, because that too sounded true. Back at Eleanor's house, the sun had begun to drop behind the pines. The patched boards held, casting hard shadows across the floor. Ethan carried the firewood inside. Clara brought in the folder and invoice copies. Eleanor removed her gloves slowly, as if returning from a funeral no one else had attended. Rook went first to the stove, then to the hallway, then back to Eleanor. Always measuring. Ethan placed the documents on the table. The paper looked too clean for what it meant. Eleanor sat before it. For a long time, she did not touch the invoice. Then she reached out and laid 2 fingers over Daniel's name. "My son trusted people," she said. "Not foolishly, not blindly. He simply believed love should not require suspicion." Clara stood by the window, face turned away. Ethan remained beside the table. Outside, the first evening stars began to appear above the snowfields, cold and bright as old witnesses. Eleanor lifted her hand from the paper. She used that. The words were quiet. They were also the truest thing anyone had said all day. Ethan looked at Rook, who had lowered himself beside Eleanor's chair, still watchful, still refusing sleep. In war, danger announced itself with heat, sound, pressure, light. In towns like this, it came wearing a beige coat and signing forms in a neat hand. It spoke gently. It took responsibility on paper, then handed death to someone else to carry. Ethan gathered the copied invoice, the video drive, and Clara's draft documents into one folder. This was no longer a feeling. It was a trail. And for the first time since Rook had barked in the storm, Ethan understood that the whiteout had not hidden Eleanor from him. It had revealed the first person Lydia Hayes had failed to erase. By the time they returned to Eleanor Hayes's house, the daylight had thinned into that blue hour winter loved best. The hour when the world looked clean enough to forgive and cold enough to remember everything. Ethan Vale carried the folder inside first. It had grown heavier without changing size. Inside were copies of Clara Whitmore's draft documents, Noah Baines's invoice, the still frame from the garage camera, and the printed line that had not left Ethan's mind since he saw it. "I'll take responsibility." Some sentences were only words, until a dead man stood behind them. Eleanor entered after him slowly, one gloved hand resting on the door frame. She had not said much on the drive back from Noah's garage. Her silence was different now from the silence of the woman Ethan had found in the snow. That silence had been exhaustion. This one had edges. Rook followed her in, snow dusting his cream-gray sable coat. The German shepherd paused just past the threshold, shook once, then stood still, as if the room required inspection before anyone was allowed to breathe in it. His black harness, trimmed in deep red, made him look almost ceremonial in the dim light, less like a pet and more like a guardian posted at the entrance of an old temple, where grief had been keeping vigil. Clara Whitmore arrived 10 minutes later, her dark sedan easing into the drive with careful tires. She came in with a leather work bag tucked under one arm, her charcoal coat buttoned high against the cold. In the low light of the house, the lawyer's face looked sharper than it had in her office. The professional mask remained, but fatigue had begun to show through it. Shadows beneath her eyes, a slight tension around the mouth, the stillness of someone who knew she had already been wrong once and could not afford to be wrong again. Ethan placed the folder on Eleanor's small kitchen table. No one sat immediately. The old house seemed too small for the evidence, the patched boards held against the wind. The stove gave off faint heat. The lamp near the table painted everything in amber. Eleanor's thin hands, Clara's closed expression, Ethan's worn gray tactical shirt, the scratched face of his old military watch. Outside, The snowfield behind the house turned violet under the falling evening. Eleanor finally removed her gloves. She looked at the folder, but did not touch it. "She signed that paper," she said. "Yes," Ethan answered. "She knew the truck was unsafe." "Yes." "And then Daniel drove it." Ethan looked at Clara. Clara's gaze lowered. "We still don't know what he was told." Eleanor gave a small nod, accepting the distinction because truth deserved accuracy, even when pain wanted speed. Rook moved away from the table. At first, Ethan thought the dog was only restless. Rook crossed the room slowly, nose close to the floorboards, not sniffing wildly but following something precise. He moved toward the narrow hallway, then paused near the old coat rack where Daniel's brown work jacket still hung. Eleanor noticed and went very still. "Again?" Clara asked softly. Ethan did not answer. Rook did not look at the jacket this time. He lowered his head toward the cardboard box beneath it, the one holding folded blankets, cracked rubber boots, and small forgotten things that old houses collected the way trees collected snow. He nosed the edge of the box once, then twice, then slipped his muzzle under a folded wool blanket and pulled. The blanket slid halfway out. Something metallic struck the floor with a small, sharp sound. Everyone heard it. The sound was not loud. It did not need to be. In that room, after that day, even a tiny object falling could feel like a bell rung in a chapel. Ethan crouched. On the floor, beside Rook's front paw, lay a key ring. 2 keys. 1 old house key. 1 vehicle key with a black plastic head worn smooth on one side. Eleanor's lips parted. Clara stepped closer. "Is that Daniel's?" Eleanor did not answer immediately. She looked as if the little ring had crossed years to arrive at her feet. "That is the spare," she said at last. Ethan picked it up carefully between thumb and forefinger. The key was cold. Too cold for a thing that should have been buried under blankets near a stove. He turned it toward the lamp. The metal teeth were slightly polished from use, but near the base, where the key met the plastic head, there was a dark smear. Oil. Not old dust, not ordinary dirt. Oil, thickened by cold, worked into the groove. Ethan's eyes narrowed. There was also a fresh scratch along the black plastic, pale against the worn surface. Not deep, but new enough that the exposed mark had not dulled. Clara leaned in, then pulled back as if afraid to disturb it. "That looks recent." Ethan took a folded paper towel from the counter and laid the key ring on it. "Where was this supposed to be?" he asked. Eleanor's face had gone pale again. "With Lydia." The answer changed the room. Clara looked at her. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Eleanor's voice trembled, but not from uncertainty. "Daniel kept the main key. Lydia kept the spare. That was their arrangement because he was always misplacing things when he worked late. He used to joke that marriage was mostly knowing where the other person put your keys." The joke died as soon as it entered the air. Ethan looked down at the key again. Rook sat beside him, ears forward, amber eyes fixed on the little object as though he too understood that some things remembered the hands that used them. This was the re-hook moment, not a grand revelation, not a confession, not a villain stepping from shadow with blood on her hands. It was only a key, small enough to vanish under a blanket, lying on a paper towel beneath a kitchen lamp. Yet for one long second, the house seemed to tilt around it. A dead man's truck. A wife's signature. A spare key that should have been with the wife now hidden in the old house Lydia had sent Eleanor back to. Oil in the groove, a fresh scar on the plastic. The truth did not roar. It clicked. Eleanor sat down suddenly. Clara reached toward her, then stopped, unsure whether comfort had been earned. Ethan stayed crouched beside the table, staring at the key. He had learned long ago that evidence was not always dramatic. Sometimes war turned on a misplaced boot print, a wire buried under sand, a shadow in the wrong window. The living survived by noticing the thing that did not belong. This key did not belong here. Did Lydia ever come to this house after Daniel died? Ethan asked. Eleanor drew a breath. She sent my bags. Did she bring them herself? No. A man from town. I didn't know him well. He said Lydia asked him to help because the roads were poor. Clara straightened. If she packed the bags, she could have put it in the box by mistake. Ethan looked at her. Clara held his gaze, and to her credit, she did not retreat from the challenge in his eyes. I'm not defending her, she said. I'm thinking like a lawyer. A misplaced key can be explained. Oil and a fresh scratch? Ethan asked. That is harder. Not impossible. No, Clara admitted. Not impossible. Eleanor looked between them. What does it mean? Ethan stood slowly. It means the spare key was used recently, or handled around the truck recently. Clara's mouth tightened. And if Lydia claimed she didn't touch the truck that day, then the key says otherwise. Eleanor closed her eyes. Rook rose and moved beside her chair. He did not press against her this time. He only stood close enough that his shoulder nearly touched her knee. His presence was steady, restrained, almost formal. Not comfort exactly, a witness offering warmth. Eleanor opened her eyes again. She told me Daniel took the truck himself, she said. When? Ethan asked. The day after the accident. She sat beside me in Daniel's living room. There were flowers everywhere. Too many flowers. She said he had insisted on driving, though she begged him not to. Eleanor's voice thinned, but did not break. She said he was stubborn. Clara looked away. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. A lie was cruel enough when it protected the liar, but Lydia's lie had done more. It had changed the shape of Daniel in his mother's memory. It had made him careless. It had made him stubborn. It had made him responsible for the final road he took. Ethan hated that with a clean, quiet anger. Did she say she was never at the garage? He asked. Eleanor nodded. She said she only heard about the breaks afterward. She said Noah must have misunderstood Daniel's concern. Clara pulled her phone from her coat pocket. I'm writing this down. Don't write it as fact, Ethan said. She looked at him. Write it as Eleanor's recollection. Date, time, context, if she remembers. Clara gave him a small nod. You've done this before. Remembering things before they get rewritten? Ethan asked. Yes. The old house grew quieter. Ethan took out his own phone and photographed the key from several angles without touching it again. He included the paper towel, the lamp's scale, the box beneath the coat rack, the oil smear, the scratch. Then he asked Clara for an envelope. She had one in her bag, white, legal-sized, too clean for the thing it would hold. He slid the key ring in without wiping it. Should we take it to the sheriff? Eleanor asked. Not yet, Clara said quickly. Ethan turned. Clara looked at the envelope in his hand. If we walk in now with drafts, an invoice, video, and a key, we have questions. Strong questions. But Lydia can still explain pieces separately. She'll say she picked up the truck as a favor. She'll say she misunderstood Noah. She'll say Daniel took the spare. She'll say the key ended up here when your bags were packed. And if we wait? Eleanor asked. Clara's expression hardened, not coldly, but with the returning structure of her profession. We organize the chain. We document where each item came from. We make sure nothing can be dismissed because we were emotional and careless. Ethan respected that too. Payne wanted to run to the nearest authority and demand the world become just. But justice, when it worked at all, liked order. It wanted dates, signatures, witnesses, contradictions. It wanted the living to be patient, while the dead waited. Eleanor looked at the envelope. "My son is dead," she said quietly. "I do not want patience." "No," Clara replied. Her voice softened. "You want truth." "I want both." Clara had no answer for that. Ethan sealed the envelope. Rook suddenly turned his head toward the front window. His ears lifted. Ethan followed the movement. Outside, beyond the glass, evening had nearly settled. The porch light cast a pale circle over the snow. Beyond that circle, the driveway lay empty except for Ethan's truck and Clara's sedan. Nothing moved. Still, Rook remained focused. A low sound gathered in his throat, not a full growl, not a bark. A warning kept behind closed teeth. Ethan went still. Clara noticed. "What?" Ethan did not answer immediately. He crossed to the window and looked out. Snowfields, fence posts, black tree line. The road beyond, half hidden by the rise of the ditch. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, far beyond the driveway, a pair of red tail lights disappeared around the bend. Too far to identify, too brief to prove anything. But there. Rook's growl faded only after the lights vanished. Eleanor had risen from the table, one hand resting on the chair for balance. "Someone was there?" she asked. "Maybe," Ethan said. Clara's face changed, fear moving through professional control like cold through a cracked pane. "We need to be careful," she said. Ethan looked back at the envelope on the table, then at Daniel's jacket in the hall, then at Eleanor, small and pale in the house Lydia had made her return to. Careful. The word had many meanings. In Ethan's world, it meant checking corners, securing exits, not assuming darkness was empty because it looked still. In Clara's world, it meant procedure. In Eleanor's, perhaps it meant not letting grief make her easy to move again. He picked up the envelope and placed it in the folder with the other documents. "We will be," he said. But his eyes went to Rook. The dog had returned to Eleanor's side, yet his attention stayed with the window. Not frantic, not afraid. Watching. Ethan understood then that the key had changed more than the evidence. It had changed the danger. Until now, they had been looking backward at Daniel's appointment, Daniel's truck, Daniel's last day. Now, for the first time, Ethan wondered if someone had begun looking back at them. He checked the lock on Eleanor's door before leaving that night. Then he checked it again. The next morning, the road outside Eleanor Hayes's house looked too peaceful for what had happened the night before. Snow lay smooth over the ditch lines. The old fence posts wore white caps. The pines beyond the house stood black and patient against a pale sky, as if they had seen every human lie before and had decided long ago not to interrupt. Ethan Vale did not trust peaceful things by default. He stood on Eleanor's porch before sunrise, dressed in his worn military gray tactical combat shirt over the dark red thermal layer, combat pants tucked over old work boots, his scratched military watch cold against his wrist. His face was clean-shaven, jaw tight, gray-blue eyes narrowed toward the road where he had seen the taillights vanish the night before. Rook stood beside him. The German shepherd's cream-gray sable coat stirred in the wind. His black harness with deep red trim was already on, though Ethan had not meant to put it on him yet. Rook had presented himself at the door that morning with the patience of a soldier waiting for gear. There were mornings when the dog wanted breakfast. This was not one of them. Inside, Eleanor moved quietly around the kitchen. She had slept little. Ethan could tell from the careful way she held herself, not slow exactly, but deliberate, as if any sudden movement might spill what she was carrying inside. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her gray-blue coat draped over the chair, and she wore a faded wool cardigan over a long, dark dress. Age had thinned her body, but not her posture. Grief bent her, only when no one was looking. Clara Whitmore arrived just after 7. Her dark sedan stopped near the porch, tires crunching over packed snow. She stepped out in her charcoal coat, with a leather work bag held tight against her side. Her dark brown hair was tied low, more hastily than before, and the sharp planes of her face looked drawn by worry. She had always appeared controlled, but today that control seemed held together by intention rather than habit. "I drove around twice before turning in," Clara said when Ethan opened the door. "Why?" She looked past him toward the road. "Because I'm learning from you." Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Inside, Clara spread the documents across Eleanor's table. Not the originals, only copies, arranged in clean rows. Daniel's draft filings, Noah Baines's invoice, the garage camera stills, photographs of the spare key, Eleanor's written recollection of Lydia's statements. Clara had also typed a timeline, each line dated, each source noted, each uncertainty marked rather than hidden. Ethan respected that. Truth handled carelessly could become only another story. Eleanor stood beside the stove, watching the papers like they were bones laid out after an exhumation. "What happens now?" she asked. Clara drew a breath. "Now we make sure none of this disappears, and then we take it to someone who can act." The phone rang before anyone could respond. The old landline on Eleanor's wall gave a brittle, metallic sound that made Rook lift his head. Eleanor looked at it as if it had spoken out of turn. The second ring came sharper. Ethan moved toward it. Eleanor raised a hand. "No, it is my house," she answered. "Hello?" Her face changed on the third second. Not fear, not surprise. Recognition. Ethan went still. Rook rose. Eleanor listened without speaking. The receiver trembled faintly in her hand, but her voice, when it came, remained polite. "Yes, Lydia." Clara's eyes closed briefly. Ethan crossed his arms, not because he needed the posture, but because his hands wanted something more violent to do. Eleanor's gaze lowered to the floor. "No," she said quietly. "I am not confused." A pause. Then Lydia's voice came through the receiver just clearly enough for Ethan to hear tone, not words. Soft, concerned, smooth as ice under fresh snow. Eleanor's mouth tightened. "I understand what you are saying." Another pause. "No, Ethan is not taking advantage of me." Rook stepped closer to Eleanor, head level, ears forward. The voice on the other end shifted. Still gentle, but quicker now. Eleanor's eyes flicked once toward Ethan. For a moment, he saw the wound Lydia was pressing. An old woman alone, a stranger helping, documents appearing, a former soldier with no family nearby. Suspicion could be planted anywhere grief had already broken the soil. Eleanor's fingers whitened around the receiver. "You are very good at making care sound like a warning," she said. The kitchen fell silent. Even the stove seemed to hold its breath. Then Eleanor hung up. She stood facing the wall for a moment longer. Clara approached softly. "What did she say?" Eleanor turned around. "She said I was vulnerable, that people like Ethan know how to make themselves necessary, that Daniel would not want me manipulated by strangers while I am grieving." Ethan looked toward the window. Of all the weapons Lydia could have chosen, she had picked the one most likely to cut. Doubt disguised as protection. Eleanor's voice thinned. "She said I was becoming confused." Clara's face hardened. "That language matters," she said. "If she claims diminished capacity, she can challenge your decisions." Ethan looked at Clara. "She's setting groundwork." "Yes." Eleanor stood straighter. "Then we write that down too." The old woman went to the table and reached for a pen. Ethan watched her hand tremble only once before she forced it still. There were different kinds of courage. Some carried rifles. Some answered phones without letting poison enter their blood. By noon, Lydia had changed tactics. A patrol cruiser pulled into the drive while Ethan was outside securing another sheet of plywood over the back window frame. The vehicle was clean, newer than most in the county fleet, with a dusting of snow along the hood. A young deputy stepped out, tall and narrow, with pale skin reddened by the cold and sandy blonde hair cut short under his winter cap. Deputy Mark Ellison looked no older than 27. He had the earnest posture of a man still trying to decide whether authority should feel heavy or impressive. His uniform was neat, his boots polished despite the road slush, and his expression carried discomfort before he said a word. He did not look like a bully. He looked like someone sent into a room where the facts had not arrived before him. "Mr. Vale?" he asked. Ethan set down the drill. "Yes." "I'm Deputy Ellison. We received a complaint." "From Lydia Hayes?" Ellison's face told Ethan the answer before his mouth did. "I'm not at liberty to discuss all details," the deputy said carefully. "But there are concerns about trespassing, harassment, and interference with estate matters." Rook came out onto the porch behind Ethan. Ellison glanced at the dog and swallowed once. "He won't bother you unless you make poor decisions," Ethan said. The deputy looked as if he was not sure whether that was reassurance. Eleanor opened the door then. "Deputy, this is my property. Mr. Vale is here at my invitation." Ellison removed his cap immediately. "Mrs. Hayes, I understand. I'm just required to document the call." Clara appeared behind Eleanor, her professional face restored like armor. "Deputy Ellison, I'm Clara Whitmore, attorney. If there is a formal allegation, I would like the report number." The deputy blinked. Ethan almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Ellison took out a notepad. "Ma'am, I'm just here to advise everyone to avoid escalating personal disputes until matters are properly reviewed." Clara's smile was small and without warmth. "Excellent advice. Please include in your notes that Mrs. Hayes requested assistance. Mr. Vale provided repairs with permission, and Ms. Lydia Hayes has now made a complaint after learning questions were being asked about Daniel Hayes's vehicle." Ellison's pen slowed. That landed. He looked at Ethan, then Eleanor, then Clara, and something in his young face shifted from procedure toward curiosity. "I'll note that," he said. Before leaving, he gave Ethan a formal warning not to enter Lydia's property or contact her directly. Ethan agreed. He had no intention of walking into a spider web just because the spider sent an invitation. When the cruiser pulled away, Clara exhaled. "She is trying to isolate the evidence," she said. "No," Ethan replied. "She's trying to isolate Eleanor." Eleanor looked at him then, and in her gray eyes he saw both gratitude and fear. Not fear of Lydia. Fear of how close Lydia had come to succeeding. By evening, they had made copies of everything twice. Clara took one set to place in her office safe. Ethan kept one in a locked metal case from his truck. Eleanor insisted on keeping the written timeline on her table. "I have been moved once," she said. "The truth can sit where I can see it." They ate soup, because Ethan had brought cans, and Eleanor had improved them with onions, pepper, and a dignity canned soup did not deserve. For 1 hour, the house almost pretended to be only a house, steam rising from bowls, Rook lying by the stove, Clara rubbing her forehead as if law had become a physical headache, Ethan standing near the window because sitting still felt unwise. Night settled hard. Clara left reluctantly just after 8, promising to call when she reached town. Ethan stayed. He did not make an announcement of it. He simply brought in more wood, checked the locks, and set a chair near the front room window. Eleanor did not object. That told him enough. At 11:17, Rook lifted his head. Ethan, a vehicle engine coughed to life beyond the bend. No headlights at first. Then a dim pair flared and disappeared down the service track. Ethan did not follow. He turned back. Eleanor stood in her bedroom doorway, one hand against the frame, face pale but composed. Rook remained in front of her, shoulders squared, a living wall of fur and instinct. "You're all right?" Ethan asked. "Yes." Her voice shook after the word, not during it. The kitchen drawer was open. Papers had been moved. Not stolen. Moved. Clara's copied timeline lay slightly crooked on the table. The envelope with the key had been shifted but not taken. The intruder had been searching quickly, not carefully. Ethan swept the flashlight across the floor. Near the table leg, half hidden under the edge of the rug, something black and small caught the light. He crouched. A magnetic tracking device, no larger than a matchbox. Beside it, a smear of wet snow and a partial boot print darkened the floorboards. Ethan did not touch the device. He stared at it. Not the break-in itself, not the shadow running into the woods, but the small black object left behind like a beetle under the table. Suddenly, the house was not only a place being searched. It was a place meant to be watched. Lydia's game was not merely defense. It was control. She had not sent someone only to steal the past. She had sent someone to follow the future. Eleanor came closer. Rook pressed against her leg. "What is it?" "A tracker," Ethan said. The word seemed to make the room colder. Eleanor looked at the table, the papers, the patched walls, then the little device. She wanted to know where the evidence went. "Or where you went," Ethan said. That was worse, and both of them knew it. Ethan photographed everything, the open drawer, the shifted papers, the boot print, the device where it lay. Then he stepped outside and found the track near the back door, one set of prints coming in from the trees and leaving fast. At the edge of the porch, something else lay half buried in snow. A torn paper parking stub. The print was smeared, but part of a logo remained. Northridge Storage. Ethan picked it up with a work glove and placed it in a plastic bag. A careless man had dropped it. Or a frightened one. Inside, Eleanor sat at the table. Rook pressed close beside her chair. Her hand rested on his harness handle, as if it were the only solid thing in the room. Ethan set the bagged stub beside the photographs on his phone. He did not smile. This was not victory. It was something sharper. Until tonight, Lydia could explain each piece separately. A concerned call, a complaint, a misunderstanding, a misplaced key, a vehicle picked up in confusion. But hired hands made mistakes, polished people did not. And now the hand had left a fingerprint of movement, if not skin. Ethan looked toward the dark window. Somewhere out there, Lydia Hayes had tried to turn the board again. But this time one of her pieces had slipped. Morning did not feel like morning. It arrived pale and cold over Mill Creek Road, sliding across the snowfields with the weary patience of something that had seen too many human sins repeat themselves. The sky was clear at last, a hard blue dome above the pines. But the beauty of it did not soften anything. Not the tracks behind Eleanor Hayes's house, not the open drawer in her kitchen, not the small black tracking device sealed in a plastic bag on her table. Ethan Vale stood beside that table, with his sleeves pushed to his forearms, gray tactical shirt worn at the cuffs, dark red thermal collar visible at his throat. His clean-shaven face looked sharper in the morning light, all square jaw and controlled anger. He had slept less than an hour. It did not show as weakness. It showed as stillness. Rook stood at Eleanor's side. The German Shepherd had not left her door after the break-in. His cream-gray sable coat caught the lamplight in quiet bands, and his amber eyes carried the grave steadiness of an animal who knew danger had crossed a threshold and might do so again. The black harness with deep red trim sat on him like armor. He had not barked since the intruder fled. He did not need to. His silence had become its own warning. Clara Whitmore arrived before 8, no longer trying to look composed for its own sake. The lawyer's dark hair was still tied low, but strands had escaped near her temples. Her charcoal coat was buttoned unevenly, and a folder was clutched to her chest, as though paper could become a shield if held tightly enough. She looked at the photographs Ethan had taken, the bagged device, the muddy boot print, the torn Northridge storage stub. Then she said, "We go to the sheriff now." Eleanor was sitting at the table, both hands around a cup of tea she had not drunk. She was a small woman in her 70s, silver hair pinned neatly despite the night, cardigan buttoned over her dress, face pale, but not broken. Grief had hollowed her. Suspicion had sharpened her. But something else had begun to rise beneath both. Resolve. "Yes," she said. "We go." The sheriff's office sat in the older part of Solace Ridge, a brick building with chipped window trim and a flag stiffened by frost. It did not look grand enough for justice, but Ethan had learned long ago that honest things rarely did. Grand buildings were often built to impress people into silence. This place looked useful. That was better. Sheriff Dana Reeves met them in her office without making them wait. She was in her early 40s, broad-shouldered and composed, with dark hair pulled back at the nape of her neck and a face built more for truth than comfort. Her skin was lightly weathered from years in mountain country, her jaw square, her eyes brown and steady beneath dark brows. She wore her uniform without decoration beyond what was required. Nothing about her invited dramatics. Everything about her suggested she would notice if a person tried them. Deputy Mark Ellison stood near the wall, looking more serious than he had the day before. The young deputy's sandy hair was combed neatly, his face still carrying that earnest, slightly reddened freshness of youth in cold weather. But his eyes had changed. He no longer looked like a man delivering a complaint. He looked like a man realizing he had been used to carry one. Dana's gaze moved from Ethan to Eleanor, then to Clara, then finally to Rook, who sat just inside the office door. That dog part of the statement? She asked. Ethan said, More than most people. Dana looked at him for half a second, then pointed at the chairs. Start at the beginning, slowly. So they did. Not with feelings first, with sequence. Clara laid out Daniel's legal drafts. The unsigned documents showing his intent to change beneficiaries, protect his mother's interest, and begin divorce proceedings. She explained Lydia's visit to her office before Daniel's appointment, the careful language about instability, the suggestion that Daniel wanted to hide assets out of spite. Eleanor described Lydia's gentle pressure after Daniel's death, the concern, the packed bags, the changed locks, the way being cared for had somehow become being removed. Ethan placed Noah Baines's invoice on the desk. Brake inspection incomplete. Vehicle not released as road safe. Customer spouse removed vehicle before completion. And there, in Lydia Hayes's neat signature, the written note Noah had added beneath. I'll take responsibility. Dana read the line twice. Her face did not change, but her thumb stopped moving along the edge of the page. Then came the garage footage, the still image of Lydia in her beige coat beside Daniel's truck. The timestamp, Noah's statement that Daniel had not been intoxicated, only anxious and distracted. Then the spare key, photographed in place, found in Eleanor's house, oil in the grooves, fresh scratch on the plastic head. A key Lydia had supposedly kept, though she had later claimed she never touched the truck. Then the break-in. The tracking device, the boot print. The Northridge storage stub dropped in the snow. Dana listened without interruption. That was the frightening thing about her. She did not rush to outrage. She did not offer easy reassurance. She let each fact enter the room and stand on its own feet. When they finished, the office was silent, except for the faint hum of the heater. Dana leaned back. What you have, she said, is not one smoking gun. Eleanor's hands tightened. Dana continued. It's worse for her. You have a pattern. Clara closed her eyes for 1 second. Ethan watched Dana's face. Can you act on it? I can start acting now. Dana turned to Ellison. Get Noah Baines on a recorded statement. Pull the full garage footage. Call Northridge Storage and freeze any override on their gate camera. I want entry logs, payment records, unit numbers connected to that stub if they have them. Ellison straightened. Yes, Sheriff. Dana looked back at Ethan. Do not contact Lydia. Do not go near her property. Do not try to be useful in ways that make my job harder. I can manage that? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Can you? Rook gave one quiet huff from the doorway. For the first time, Dana almost smiled. By afternoon, the story began moving faster than grief could follow. Northridge Storage sat beyond the rail spur at the east edge of town. A flat spread of corrugated metal doors, chain-link fence, and frozen gravel. Dana did not allow Eleanor inside the search area, but she let them sit in the sheriff's vehicle while deputies worked. Ethan stayed beside the passenger door, watching the lot, the road, the angles. Clara sat with Eleanor in the back, speaking softly only when necessary. Rook stood outside with Ethan, nose lifted into the cold air. A storage manager unlocked the office after Dana presented the warrant. He was a nervous man with a round face, red ears, and a habit of rubbing his palms on his pants. His name was Peter Lang, and he looked like he had never wanted to be important in any story. He gave Dana the logs, the camera access, and the payment records with the terrified eagerness of someone who had just realized small negligence could become large trouble. The unit tied to the dropped stub had been rented under a false name. Paid in cash. But the gate camera showed the intruder's vehicle. The same man from Eleanor's kitchen appeared on footage, face partly turned toward the camera, carrying a small bag and speaking on the phone. Another camera angle caught the license plate just clearly enough. Dana's deputies traced it within an hour. The man's name was Colin Rusk. He was 32, a handyman with a thin criminal record, a tired face, and too many unpaid debts. When deputies brought him in, he lasted less than 40 minutes before admitting Lydia had paid him to recover personal property from Eleanor's house and place a tracker so Lydia could know where the stolen documents were being taken. That was the re-hook moment. Not a chase, not a shout, not a courtroom thunderclap. Just a tired man in a small interview room, finally saying Lydia's name aloud. In that instant, all her beautiful caution cracked. The woman who had never pushed, never screamed, never dirtied her hands, had forgotten that people she paid still had mouths. And once one small mouth opened, the whole elegant machine began to sound like metal tearing. By evening, Dana had enough. Lydia Hayes was arrested outside Daniel's house just before sunset. Eleanor did not go with them. Dana would not allow it, and Ethan would not have advised it. But word traveled through Solace Ridge the way fire moves under dry leaves. By the time Ethan drove Eleanor past Main Street, people had already begun standing too long at windows, pausing outside the bakery, whispering beside idling trucks. Lydia stood beside the sheriff's cruiser in a long camel-colored coat, dark hair perfectly smooth, face composed even as Deputy Ellison read the warrant. She was beautiful in the exact way Eleanor had described. Controlled, polished, calm enough to make panic look vulgar. But when Dana took the tracking device from an evidence bag and said something Ethan could not hear, Lydia's eyes changed. Only for a second. The mask did not fall. It slipped. Eleanor saw it from the truck. Her breath caught, but she did not look away. Rook stood in the back seat, body angled toward the window. Not barking. Not growling. He watched Lydia as if memorizing the moment the storm finally received a name. The charges did not become simple just because Lydia was taken away. Nothing involving law ever did. The investigation widened. Insurance records were reopened. Daniel's death was reclassified, pending further review. Lydia's claim was frozen. Her access to the estate was suspended. Clara filed emergency motions, this time with no doubt in her hands. Noah gave his statement. Colin Rusk signed his. Phone records confirmed calls between him and Lydia before the break-in. Financial records uncovered pressure beneath Lydia's elegance, hidden debts, private transfers, and communication with a man connected to a real estate group circling properties near Mill Creek Road. It took weeks for the first real order to arrive, then months for the rest. But justice, when it finally came, did not arrive like lightning. It came like thaw, slow, ugly, necessary, revealing what had been buried beneath the snow. Eleanor's rights were restored first. Daniel's intended changes, though unsigned, became part of the court's understanding of his state of mind. Lydia's control over the estate was stripped. Insurance investigators reopened the policy payout and froze Lydia's claim pending criminal proceedings. The house in town, Daniel's accounts, and the remaining property interests were returned to proper review with Eleanor protected. When Eleanor received the court notice, she did not cheer. She sat at her kitchen table in the old house Ethan had been repairing, the same table where the key had once lain beneath the lamp. The patched walls were no longer temporary. Ethan had replaced the worst boards properly. the window sealed cleanly now. Wood was stacked high near the stove. Rook lay beside her chair, muzzle on his paws, finally sleeping. Eleanor read the notice once, then again. Finally, she set it down and touched Daniel's photograph. "They gave back what they could," she said. Ethan stood by the stove, one hand resting on the mantel. "Yes. They cannot give back what matters." "No." Her eyes remained on the photograph. "But perhaps what remains can still matter." That spring, when the snow began retreating from the fields and the first stubborn green showed along the fence lines, Eleanor established the Daniel Hayes Home Protection Fund. She did not keep all that was returned to her. A portion of the recovered estate and insurance settlement, once cleared through review, went into the fund. Clara helped build it properly. With bylaws, oversight, legal partners, and safeguards, Eleanor insisted on reading herself. Noah donated quietly and threatened anyone who thanked him. Deputy Ellison volunteered at the first public information meeting, looking older than he had in winter. Sheriff Dana Reeves sent people there before they signed anything they did not understand. The fund helped elderly residents facing coercion, predatory relatives, bad contracts, and polite pressure dressed as concern. Eleanor stood at the first meeting in the town library, small beneath the fluorescent lights, silver hair pinned neatly, gray eyes clear. "My son trusted love," she told them. "That was not his mistake. The mistake belonged to those who used it against him." Ethan stood in the back with Rook at his side. He did not speak. He did not need to. Months later, on a mild afternoon when the last snow had vanished from the roofline, Ethan finished repairing the porch steps of Eleanor's old house. The boards were plain, sturdy, honest. Eleanor came outside carrying 2 cups of tea. Rook followed her slowly, no longer tense, no longer scanning every shadow. The dog lay down in a patch of sun. Eleanor handed Ethan a cup. "You stopped because he barked," she said. Ethan looked at Rook. "He usually knows before I do." "Yes," she said. "But you still had to turn the truck around." The words settled quietly between them. Beyond the porch, the pines moved in a soft wind. The house no longer looked abandoned. It looked aged, wounded, repaired, and still standing. Eleanor sat beside him. "For a while," she said, "I thought evil would look like rage, like a slammed door, like someone shouting." Ethan took a sip of tea. "And now?" She watched Rook sleep. "Now I know it can look like concern." The wind moved through the trees. Ethan said nothing, but he stayed. And in the warm, ordinary silence that followed, the old woman, the former soldier, and the dog rested beneath a sky that had finally stopped snowing, not because winter had been defeated, but because enough truth had survived it. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive as thunder in the sky or a bright light breaking through the clouds. Sometimes they arrive as a bark in the snow, a stranger who turns his truck around, an old woman who refuses to let grief erase the truth, and a loyal dog who senses danger before the human heart is ready to understand it. This story reminds us that evil does not always look loud or cruel. Sometimes it wears a gentle voice. Sometimes it calls itself concern. Sometimes it makes a person feel guilty for needing help. But God sees what people try to hide. He sees the quiet tears, the locked doors, the lonely roads, and the truth buried beneath polite lies. In everyday life, we may never know when a small act of kindness becomes the answer to someone's prayer. A phone call, a visit, a ride home, or simply choosing not to look away may become the moment God uses to bring light back into someone's darkness. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from. And if you believe kindness can still change a life, please share this story with someone who needs hope and subscribe to the channel for more stories about courage, loyalty, faith, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your home, comfort every lonely heart, and guide you toward the people who need your kindness most.